So the obvious overt start of World War II, and a date that will stand with most people, is the 1st of September 1939, when on a trumped-up deal, Hitler invades Poland, manages to take the country in the matter basically a month. Poland is through. Unbeknownst to a lot of folks, there was an agreement with the Soviet Union, and a lot of folks forgot this during the war, is that Hitler didn't take all of Poland. The Soviet Union took the eastern part as part of an agreement. There were atrocities committed there, later came out during the Cold War. But that is the big move. Now the French and the British have guaranteed Poland's safety, and after some diplomatic moves on the 1st and 2nd of September, they declare war on the 3rd, and we're finally, the start of the war is really underway. Well, it wasn't too long before more is being grabbed up. Norway is an important aspect of the strategic picture for Germany because it lies astride tremendous iron reserves in Sweden. That supply line has to be guaranteed into Germany. It got a tremendous amount of its steel components from there. Also, then after what's called the Phony War, kind of nothing much happened. The fall, early spring of 1939, 1940, but Hitler's finally ready to move against France. Comes across in a daring move, which again anybody should have been prepared for if they knew World War I history. But he moves in through Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands, sweeps around, takes northern France like there was hardly anybody protecting it. In 6 weeks, it's all over. France surrenders. The French keep the southern part of the country in Vichy France. That becomes important in the North Africa invasion we'll get to in a moment. But essentially, look what we've got. Hitler now has most of Western Europe, except for your neutral countries of Switzerland, basically Spain, Portugal, and the big nemesis, the United Kingdom. And that's where we get to one of the most famous air battles in history, the Battle of Britain. Hitler had devised an operation called Sea Lion. Sea Lion was going to be the ultimate invasion of the British Isles, something that hadn't been done since 1066 when William the Conqueror went over from Normandy. And this is the only way, of course, you can get to the British Isles. Mass paratroop movements were not a thing at the time. But in order to invade across the English Channel, you've got to have air superiority. The Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy have to be out of or not over the Channel so that the invasion fleet can move against the Isles. So starts the Battle of Britain, where an outnumbered Royal Air Force, but one that's on the defensive. It's protecting its homeland, goes up against the mighty Luftwaffe that has rolled through Poland, the Scandinavian, or Norway, and the Low Countries with relative impunity, and now they're going to tackle the RAF. This is a picture of, it's a painting done of just one aspect of the battle, the famous Royal Air Force Hawker Hurricane, Downing in this case, a Messerschmitt 109, air battle going on behind it over the English countryside. The bottom line is the British did not get chased from the skies. They did not lose control of the Channel. This photo is one of the most famous. Here we have St. Paul's Cathedral standing mightily among the Blitz of London. And here is the next major aspect of the strategic bombing in Europe. We've got a bombing attack that, as it happens in war very often, is an accidental attack on London. A Heinkel 111 crew misnavigates. They drop their bombs on London instead of the prescribed military target. Well, this incenses Churchill, of course, and the British people. So the next day, Churchill orders a retaliatory raid against Berlin, where Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, had promised that no bomber will ever touch Berlin. He was sort of proven wrong that night. In fact, he said, "You can call me Meyer," which was a derogatory name in the minds of the Germans. So Herr Goering became Herr Meyer very quickly. But the point is, the tit-for-tat retaliation, London for Berlin, Berlin for London, starts at this point. In the end, there's about 71 attacks on London between September of 1940 and May of 1941, in which some 40,000 British civilians are killed. Many kids were sent out of the city to relatives out in the country. But it wasn't just London; it was Hull, Liverpool, Birmingham, etc., that became part of what's known as the Blitz. And here we have one of the first great examples of a bombing campaign against great cities, primarily for the purpose of demoralizing the population, and also, of course, shutting down the great ports of Liverpool and London, but primarily get the British people to make Churchill sue for peace. Well, it didn't work out quite that way. Like Guernica, another city becomes a very, very potent example of the unleashed power of strategic bombing, and that's Coventry. This is a picture of Coventry city center after the famous raid, the most damaging of the 14th of November 1940, and then the beautiful Coventry Cathedral in ruins. And here it is, the defenseless British population, and you can see the rest of the story in the newspapers and the populace. This almost becomes a rallying cry, like "Don't forget the Alamo," but Coventry can be avenged, and London, and the losses of the civilian population. Meanwhile, the war goes on, and Hitler takes, for various and sundry political reasons, takes Greece and Yugoslavia, Crete. Crete, very important for control of the Mediterranean. Hitler lost a tremendous number of paratroops in that invasion and never mounted another paratroop attack during the rest of the war. And then comes the big, probably one could say this is almost Hitler's Waterloo, hearkening back to the war of the Napoleonic era. But he goes in because of the Lebensraum concept, needs the great breadbasket of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, etc. If you'll look at the map, there is an interesting problem with invading the Soviet Union at this time. That narrow part there on the Polish, Czech, Romanian area becomes very, very wide as you get into it. It sucks up armies. Napoleon found it in 1812. Others found it trying to invade Russia. Hitler had great success. I mean, we are talking millions of people killed and captured, a scale that we're really not familiar with in the Western warfare, but in the East was huge. And your primary goals were Leningrad to the north, Moscow in the center, and eventually the Caucasus oil fields down on the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan area, because oil runs a war machine. The picture shown here is of Stalingrad, where the Germans finally have their first major rout. An entire army, the 6th Army under Field Marshal von Paulus, has been trying to take this city, a major industrial city, and the crossover of the river, for months, and is finally surrounded. The Germans unable to break through. That's a German transport plane trying to get supplies into the beleaguered 6th Army. It failed. The army is captured, and about 1% of those troops ever saw Germany again. Part of the brutality on the Eastern Front that was not as present on the Western Front later on. That's a picture of the tactical bombing of Stalingrad as the Luftwaffe is trying to support and get Russian troops out of the way so the Germans can move ahead. Unfortunately, it shows one other thing. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference whether you're a military or civilian guy, how you label the bombing. It looks pretty much the same, strategically or tactically. In the middle of that town, people are dying and there is carnage. Labels aren't very important at that point.